Hello and welcome to Lukman IAS. So welcome to the analysis of 2024 UPSC Mains GS3 Economy sections. So in this particular session, we'll see as to how the questions in this year's 2024 Mains turned up and how did it match with the overall trend of asking question by UPSC. So quickly we'll see as to the marking scheme, as to whether UPSC stuck to the particular marking scheme relevant to the economy section. Then we'll see the sectional part. At the same time, we'll also see the questions and relevant answer as to what could have been the best answer for those specific questions. So quickly we'll see one by one. So if we see the trend of asking questions in economy GS3 part, it has been consistently at 100 marks for the past 4 years. So did UPSC maintain this particular portion for GS3 economy part? Yes. This year also they have maintained this ratio of 100 marks out of 250 of GS3. So 4 questions was 10 marker short answer type and 4 questions were long answer type question 15 marker. So these were 15 markers and these were 10 markers. So total it was again 8 questions and it continued to be 100 out of 250 marks. And that is why the relevance of economy as a subject in UPSC mains, we know that UPSC prelims in PT examination, economy is supposedly around about 15 to 20 marks, 20 questions are specifically asked in economy in PT, and mains also they have maintained 8 questions. So roughly 40% of the marks of GS3 is economy. Then we'll see as to how were the question and from which portion of the syllabus was the question asked. If we see the trend, we know that agroeconomy specifically talks about crop diversification or cropping pattern, supply chain management, PDS and subsidies, and relevant topics like land reform. Did UPSC ask majority of the questions from agroeconomy? We know that one thing, that most of the questions in PT is from macroeconomy. But when it comes to mains, agroeconomy constitutes roughly 50% of the total marks which are asked in the GS3 economy section. So we'll see whether they have continued this trend or whether they have deviated or whether they have introduced a newer concept to it. So this was the overall highlight as far as the marking scheme is concerned. Now we'll see sectional part as to from which portion of the syllabus did UPSC ask in this year's mains examination. So from macroeconomy, if we count the macroeconomy section, particularly from the mains perspective, technically they target largely inflation, poverty, employment. These are the most important areas as far as mains questions are concerned. And this year's too, they have asked a specific question relevant to the current development, that is food inflation, as to what are the main causes of food inflation and whether RBI as a monetary policy regulator has the tools with them to control and tame the food inflation or not. And then there was another question which was related to, you can say, employment and more from the reforms as far as codification of 29 labor laws, the central labor laws are concerned. So this is the development which has been happening from 2018 onwards. Although it has not been successful, as I'm not saying that they are not successful, they have not been implemented in totality. We'll see the relevant question when they appear in subsequent part of this particular discussion. And as far as the combination of marks was concerned, so from inflation part it was 10 marker question or direct question, and from the labor code it was a long question type thing which constituted 15 marker question. So it was a long answer type question. Then from this was the newer introduction. Technically, when we talk about social services, we also have social issues as a part of GS2 syllabus, where we talk about some of the issues related to health, education and all those things. But from the economic development perspective, UPSC asked one of the questions that were based on public expenditure trends. Public expenditure on social sector. Social sector. We'll see. And this question was a direct, you can say it was a direct takeaway from economic survey. If we go and see the relevant chapters of economic survey, we'll come to know that one of the chapters specifically talks about this social sector, which includes health, education and other social services like sanitation, housing and all those relevant activities. And there are plethora of data, trends, pie chart which constitutes all the developments which have taken place in the past, you can say a decade or even more than that. And based on that, a question was directly asked as to analyze the public expenditure trend on social sector. And this question was a straight 10 marker short answer type question. It was a short answer type question from this social sector. If we can conclude as to which portion of this particular question was asked from, it was more related to economic survey and budget, and that is one of the topic of mains aspect of GS3 economy. Then the core topic, agroeconomy. As I told you, agroeconomy has consistently been asked for more than 50% of the total marks in the GS3 economy, and this year also they have continued the trend. They have continued the trend. If we see a total of 40 marks, 40 marks were asked from agroeconomy, and that constituted topics from millets. So this was a kind of crop diversification, cropping pattern, a subtype cropping pattern as to why millets are important, how they can tackle nutritional security, at the same time what has been relevant developments or the initiatives from the government's end. Apart from that, there was one question related to irrigation, and that was a long answer type question related to effectiveness and efficiency. We'll see those questions in subsequent part of this particular session. And the third part, which was one of the core concepts that should be known as far as agroeconomy is concerned, is public distribution system, at the same time buffer stock provisions. This was also a long answer type question. So overall it was 40 marks out of 80, that is 50% of the syllabus or 50% of total marks from economy. Then again, land reforms. It was, you can say, a particular question was also asked in 2023 related to land reforms also, and this year also they have asked about success of land reforms. In some of the states, we have seen that land reforms were successful vis-a-vis and some of the other states. What were those factors? And that question was a direct question, a 10 marker question. And at last, it was from infrastructure. The last topic, if you go and see the syllabus part, it is infrastructure and investment models. And this year they have asked from infrastructure specifically regional air connectivity and also analysis of the UDAN scheme. Although there were predictions like this year there has been quite a development in high speed rail and railway modernization, but UPSC does not only ask from the current development, they can also try to analyze, they can also ask for the analysis of certain flagship schemes. And if we talk about aviation sector, we need to know more about the UDAN scheme, as it is the flagship scheme of the Ministry of Civil Aviation. And from that they have asked a long answer type question. It was a long answer type question, and it was a direct question. We could have used some of the data from economic survey. If you go and see the economic survey of this year's economic survey, they have categorically mentioned the UDAN scheme. They have also come up with some of the data that is included, like passenger traffic, like the routes which have been sanctioned, the viability gap funding which have been released by the government of India. All these data are there. So you needed to include those things in your answer writing to make it look more relevant as far as the demand of the question. So this was overall analysis from sectional aspects of the syllabus as far as UPSC mains questions are concerned. Now overall, if we talk about the overall verdict, so if we go and see the broader analysis, it was an easy to moderate paper. It was easy to moderate paper. Why I am saying this? It was between this. I would not say it was difficult because some of the things were, the questions were direct. It was straightforward framing. If you go and see the questions, 4 questions were directly what type, what do you mean by this, what is this, what are the factors behind this, and also other part of those questions also had discuss, analyze, explain, elucidate. So these were some of the things which are needed from the candidate to prepare beforehand. You need to have those content, ready-made content when you write those answers. So the question framing was straightforward and it was quite attemptable. If you could have just made sure that you know those basic concepts, you could have written a good answer. Followed it by certain value enrichment from the data and facts as far as economic survey brings it out. A new addition was social sector, as I told you. Technically, UPSC does not go deep into those health and education aspect because it has certain overlapping with the GS2 syllabus also. But this year, they have asked the trend part, the data-driven part. So this was a new addition. And if you talk about matching the previous year's question, land reform question was a direct. There was certain similarity as far as, and that too, a very recent question was asked from land reform. And current development was food inflation. We know that inflation has been curtailed, inflation has been brought down. There is a disinflation where the year-on inflation has been brought down through various proactive measures of the monetary policy regulator, the Reserve Bank of India. But still there is persistent food inflation, and the UPSC asked direct question out of this. So this was overall analysis of this year's mains paper. And now we'll see one by one the questions and relevant content which could have been added to make it look better. So straight away we'll see the questions which appeared in the paper. So the first question said, examine the pattern and trend of public expenditure on social services. So this was social services. So you needed to know which all things come under social services. It is health, education, and other services, other social services. And it asked post-reform period, to what extent this has been in consonance with the achievement of objectives of inclusive growth. So this was a part of it, connected the question of inclusive growth along with that. So we needed to know about, we needed to introduce this concept of social services. Then we should have straight away come to the trends. And this year's economic survey was beneficial. So that is why the relevance of economic survey in answer writing is very much paramount. You need to know some of the concepts which are given in economic survey. So straight away it highlighted that the social service expenditure in the past 6 years itself, in post-reform, we have brought in many of the schemes like in the health department. If you talk about the health part, it has increased to 2.1%. If you go a little bit back and you know that there is a National Health Policy 2017. There is National Health Policy 2017. So it talked about increasing public expenditure to 2.5% by 2025. And if we know that the current trend is we have achieved 2.1% thanks to some of the flagship schemes, specifically Ayushman Bharat. Under Ayushman Bharat, we have brought in the insurance-based system. Apart from that, there is another flagship scheme, that is Pradhan Mantri Swasthya Suraksha Yojana, wherein tertiary healthcare facilities and super specialty hospitals are being created all around India. There are many AIIMS which have been brought in. There are many super specialty hospitals which have been brought in by government's expenditure. So you needed to put in those data and also quoting some of the relevant government schemes. As far as education is concerned, because of this national education policy, and there are another Nipun Bharat scheme. Apart from that, there is Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan. We have brought in many of the targeted intervention, and that has led to gross enrollment ratio going above 100%, and we are striving for 50% gross enrollment ratio by 2030 in higher education. And this is how you could have brought in the data aspect. You needed to counter this question through data only. Then apart from that, other social services, you could have quoted these developments like transit oriented development, TOD facilities for urban infrastructure. For sanitation, we have Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. For housing, we have flagship scheme like Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, wherein the budget allocation has been quite high, and we are well in line to achieve housing for all as envisaged by our Prime Minister. That is how you could have attempted this question, by having a mix of content, data, as well as certain schemes, specifically the flagship schemes. And in terms of justifying whether this is in consonance with the objective of inclusive growth, you could have straight away quoted the National Multidimensional Poverty Index, which has specifically quoted that the poverty headcount ratio, or the number of people below poverty line, has sharply declined from 29% to 11% in 2022. So from 29% in 2013-14, the headcount ratio has moved down to 11%, and this year we have said that we are in line to, you can say, eradicate absolute poverty, because it has been projected in the recent household consumption expenditure survey that it is nearly 5%. So in a way, that has, all these schemes has ensured that inclusive growth, the path, we stick to those path also by ensuring the development should reach all the sections of the society. So this is how you could have attempted this question. Similarly, the second question, and here we have just pasted one of the images from our own test series, and in our test series, the test 5, it has a similar question related to food inflation. The question was, what are the causes of persistent high food inflation in India? Comment on the effectiveness of monetary policy of RBI. It said that you need to know whether monetary policy of RBI has those tools or not to tame food inflation. We know that RBI can, I can say they have all those tools to tame the inflation, the overall headline inflation. But do they have those necessary, you can say, things with them, the kitties in their kit, all those arrows in their kitties to tame the food inflation or not? So this was question based on that. So before that, you needed to just bring in the idea that although inflation has got down, it has got down from, you can say, 6 to 7% to nearly 3.5%. The core inflation has been brought down to 3.5%. And at the same time, there is a divergence which has been seen that the core inflation has gone down, but the headline inflation, wherein the food inflation is very high, it's still 7 to 8%, and that is a cause of concern. And we needed to then start that what are the factors. Within that answer also, we could have also added why bringing down food inflation is very much paramount and very much critical for the development of India, because we know that food is the core expenditure, consumption expenditure for rural consumers. It constitutes more than 50% of their basket, and that is why if there is high food inflation, that would mean a lower purchasing power for rural consumers. Then we could have brought in the three things. We know that whenever we want to explain any inflation, there are three types of inflation. We know that there is one cost push inflation, there is another demand pull inflation, and there is structural or built-in inflation. And based on these parameters pertaining to food side, pertaining to agroeconomy side, we could have modeled our answer. Like persistent high food inflation we had discussed. Then supply side constraint. Why there is supply issue which is causing high food inflation? The main issue is erratic monsoon. If you could gauge, in 2021 and 2022, we had back-to-back El Nino years. And that meant our food production could not be increased. Or at the same time, there was certain, you can say, reduction in food supply. The crop production for wheat went down. And because of that, it had a bearing in very high inflation in wheat prices. And we could have mentioned this thing also. Apart from that, There's also a condition of poor storage infrastructure, and that leads to poor post-harvest losses. Our material handling, our food crop handling post-production is not so good, and that leads to wastage. And that could be a supply side factor rather than demand side factor. Then we could have also added the structural factor more from supply side. One thing is input costs. If you could connect it with the fertilizer prices, you go and see the fertilizer subsidies was very high because the prices of fertilizer went higher, and that meant it became unaffordable for many farmers to have, you can say, ability to purchase those fertilizers. You could have introduced that factor also. And then obviously demand side, India having a very high population, and that is also growing, although at a slower rate, but still in absolute terms it is growing. And that means population, growth of population along with income increase means people would shift their dietary pattern from wheat based or cereal based product consumption to more refined items, to more nutritious food, to more horticultural products. You could have brought in the concept of that last year tomato price. Because of supply shock, because of erratic monsoon and demand, dietary preferences to tomato, we saw the prices of tomato going up by more than 10 times. And changing dietary patterns. What we have seen that we are now moving towards more nutritious food, and there's a condition that when we move towards high order food, the wastage also go up. What happens if you eat wheat based flour? It has lower wastage, but if you eat refined flour like maida, the output from same amount of grain would be lower. That means if majority of population has shifted towards maida based diet, the food wastage would increase, and that would get reflected in high food inflation. This was one of the core aspects. Then the second part, whether monetary policy has those effectiveness, you could have straight away neglected this thing, and this has been categorically accepted by even the Monetary Policy Committee, that they have limited tool as far as controlling the supply side factors. We know that Monetary Policy Committee targets consumer price index, that is more demand pull inflation. They can bring down the demand pull inflation by increasing the repo rates. But what if the prices from the supply, there is supply shock? What would happen that if there is more supply shock, then the RBI has no other tools but to have a wait and watch game. RBI would be having a wait and watch game. They cannot have another, they cannot keep on increasing policy rates. So in that sense, the effectiveness to control this food inflation from RBI side is limited, and they can only wait till the supply resumes or till we have bumper food crop production. You could have entered this answer in this manner also. So this could have been a better measure. Now coming to the third question. So the third question says, what factors were responsible for the successful implementation of land reforms in some of the states? What was the main factors? So first you could have introduced about the land reforms. So what all those land reforms? It was ceiling, it was consolidation, abolition of intermediaries, and the third aspect was land redistribution to sharecroppers. Now there is another question, a similar question which was asked from our side, from Lukman IAS. It was highlight various land reforms undertaken post-independent and assess the success and failure of land reforms in reducing rural poverty and inequality. In a way, if the student would have attempted this question, he would have got to know all the aspects relevant to the success part and relevant to the failure part, and he could have also got the data which could have been used in this straight away this question, which could have fetched him a better proposition in marks. So related to the factors responsible, the first factor was political will. We know that it was more like a political thing. So if the political representatives were having those willpower that they want to implement those land reforms, they could have been successful. And some of the states like West Bengal, like Kerala, there was successful land reforms. Why? Because the political leadership there was more inclined towards communistic philosophy, where they wanted to give powers from those landlords towards those people who was not having land. So you could have added those things. Like the left front government in West Bengal, they actively promoted awareness among land sharecroppers. They started an operations known as Operation Barga. Operation Barga was just like Bataidar. Bataidar are the ones which are known as sharecroppers who do not own land. They only go into an informal agreement with the landlords, wherein landlords act like absentees landlord. They do not do all those activities. It is the sharecropper which cultivate food crops from their land which is owned by landlords, और बाद में उस चीज को शेयर क्रॉपर्स शेयर कर लेते हैं आपस में. सो लैंडलॉर्ड्स गेट दोज फूड विदाउट डूइंग मैनुअल लेबर ऑन देयर फार्म्स. So against this only they brought in Operation Barga, where in Operation Barga what was done, sharecroppers were identified and they were given the registration for the land on which they were doing sharecropping. This was a movement wherein more than 15 lakh sharecroppers were actually made land owners. And how did they get the land? Through land ceiling. There was a ceiling on the personal cultivation amount, how much amount of land they could hold for their personal cultivation. So whatsoever was over and above the ceiling were pooled and were distributed to sharecroppers. So this was one of the highlights. Then second thing was supportive bureaucracy. In those states, what was given, that we know that political leaders, they only frame laws. It is the bureaucracy which implement on ground. And in those states, bureaucracy were given certain powers. They had the powers to thwart all those, to resist all those political pressure which was also being impacted through bigger landlords. What they did? They used coercive tax, pressurized tactics use करते थे. What they used to do? Sharecroppers को ही जाकर they used to beat them. अब उसके अगेंस्ट ब्यूरोक्रेसी के पास अगर कुछ कंप्लेन आता, then these states where the land reforms were more successful, the bureaucrats could have taken certain actions because they had been given certain powers. So this was activism from bureaucracy also. Then grassroots movements to increase public awareness, to create public pressure and community consciousness about importance of getting those lands rather than being devoid of those rights, because we know that land as a factor of production is most important. It is one of the most important assets to uplift the standards of living. If you have got the land, you can move up the economic ladder. This is a general, you can accepted norms. Apart from that, there were strong legal frameworks. There were specific acts like West Bengal's Land Reform Act, Kerala Land Reforms Act. Apart from that, there were other states also, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar also. These acts, state-specific acts were brought in. But in those states, they were implemented on paper and in reality also. And the next important part, this was one of the highlights as to why some of the states had successful land reforms while others could not have. It was more about updated land records. So if those states, after a frequent interval of time, say after 25 years, they go for land record updation and modernization, what happens? The state agency knows who owns the land, and it becomes very easy for those state machinery to know about the ceiling, the extra land, and what could be distributed. So this was one of the highlights as to why this was successful in states like in West Bengal and Kerala, and it failed in Bihar. If you go and see the last cadastral survey or the last land survey on a huge level, on a statewide level, was only done in 1890 in Bihar. And after that, it has not been done. There have been certain revisional survey, but it could not be implemented in totality. But in West Bengal, frequent surveys have been done and the land records have been updated, so it became very easy to identify the original landowners, which could not happen in those states where land reform failed. Then equity in land distribution. So when there was political pressure, when there was grassroots awareness, those who were actually being exploited, they knew that they wanted to get those right and they wanted to eliminate those intermediaries. And this is how abolition of zamindari and other intermediaries were created in those states. And what was the immediate impact? Many sharecroppers, which were only tilling land generation on generation, they became landowners. Thanks to the political will, the activism, and also the feature which was the center of ideas as far as land reform is concerned. So these were the points. If you could have modeled your answer based on these points, you could have written a general better answer in this particular question. The fourth question, explain, again simple, explain the role of millets for ensuring health and nutritional security in India. So it was more like a lifestyle question. You could have argued that is it a science question or a health question, but this was more from the concept of crop diversification. So this is a topic under agroeconomy. This is a topic under agroeconomy, and under this you could have written about the millets as nutri-cereals. You could have introduced this thing, millets as nutri-cereals, and why India is promoting. Why? Because India is the largest producers, having a share of 41% of total millet production in the world. And India's dietary preferences, if you go back in the civilizational era, in the ancient era, millets was one of the crops which was consumed before agriculture, systematic agriculture and crop production like rice and wheat dotted on India's civilization. So what India wants to do? India wants to move back. India wants to be the spearhead to make sure that the dietary preferences again changes towards millet consumption because of certain health, nutritional as well as certain environmental factors which are more positive as far as as far as consumption of millets is concerned. Then the first part you could have targeted nutritional benefits. Why? Because it has rich source of nutrients like fiber, proteins, vitamins, and it is gluten free. Gluten is one of the, you can say, protein which is more like which gives elasticity to those product like roti and bhatura. Those elasticity are all because of gluten. So millet based diet actually does not have gluten, and some of those people, they like those having celiac disease, they have certain gluten intolerance, and that is not good from the perspective of glycemic index. Those refined cereals like wheat and white rice or maida, they are having high glycemic index that lead to spike in blood sugar level, but millets does not have this thing, and that leads to maintaining obesity as well as controlling diabetes. So you could have introduced these things as a part of health factor. And from the nutritional aspects, you could have talked about it can also address India's malnutrition because it is power packed with essential micronutrients. So that would help in tackling child malnutrition, because if we talk about the malnutrition, there are three things, that is stunting, wasting, and underweight. So in these factors, India has a stunting factor of around about 32%, wasting of around about 19%. This is also about 30%. So stunting is low, height to age. This is all low. This is weight to height, wasting, and underweight is low, weight to age. See, on all these parameters, as per the NFHS 5 data, India ranks poorly in some of the regions. Actually has data which is similar to sub-Saharan Africa. So you could have tackled this thing. We will also introduce the environmental sustainability aspect as to millets growing consumes 70% less water, and this could be an answer to depletion of groundwater it is taking at a rapid pace in India. So you could have added these aspects. And from value enrichment, if we say that millets is being promoted, you could have added those things as from the perspective of Government of India and all those initiatives which are being taken by them, like they have declared millets as Shri Anna. Apart from that, 2023 International Years of Millet has been declared by United Nations, and Government of India has also declared this thing, and millet consumption has been incorporated. Consumption of millet, consumption and distribution. So what they want to do, the government of India through Ministry of Consumer Affairs, they want to distribute millets and they want to incorporate this as a part of Poshan Abhiyan and Integrated Child Development Scheme, where millets is also distributed to lactating mothers and those children. Then apart from that, there is specific export promotion forum in the Ministry of Commerce and Industry which dedicatedly looks at promoting branded millets. They want to create products and brand it as one of the things which could help in ensuring farmers, increase in farmer income, those who are growing millets. They want to divert. What is the focus? The government of India wants to divert some of the land which is being used for cultivation of rice and wheat towards millet production. And for that they want to create those forward linkages. अगर production हो रहा है तो पहले demand भी होना चाहिए. Demand के लिए बस domestic demand, they cannot rely based on this. They want to create high value added things and they want to target Europe, West and all those developed economies where they want to promote millet as a brand and which could be help in increasing and doubling farmers' income. So this is how the government of India is also doing these things. And the platform where they showcased this thing was G20 presidency. In the G20 presidency, last year in 2023, the government of India showcased wherein the heads of states and all those relevant, very important persons, the VIPs, they were given baskets of millets and some of the products which were given from millets, which were created out of millets only, so as to give it an international exposure. G20 acted like a platform for this. So these were the initiatives. You could have added this thing and given a good conclusion as to write a particular concrete answer to satisfy the demand of this question. Now the fifth question. Out of nowhere, this was not in news, labor code. Because in 2020, since 2020 onwards, this has died down. As to labor codes, this was a resurgent thing that India wants to consolidate all those labor laws and make India pro-business friendly, but out of nowhere, because these are contemporary topic. If you are preparing for civil services, if you are preparing for the labor reforms and all those things, you need to know these things also. So this was all about the discussing the merits and demerits of labor codes. So you needed to introduce this thing by bringing the concepts of the 4 labor codes, which are code on wages, code on industrial relations, code on social security and occupational safety, health and working conditions. So these are the 4 codes. You could have introduced this thing and straight away you could have talked about the merits of the labor code, like simplification of labor laws. It tries to consolidate 29 labor laws into different codes so that it becomes very easy for the government, for the industries as well as for the employees. The tripartite, there are 3 main stakeholders: the government, all the state agencies, the employer or the companies, and employees, the workers. All these stakeholders should have clarity as far as what is the legislative framework, and consolidation would have relaxed these things. Then flexibility and employment has been introduced. Under this, a fixed term contract, FTC, wherein the employer can engage employee for a fixed period of employment, say 2 year, 3 year, 5 year, and they can extend all those benefits like they are working as a regular employee of their particular company. So this introduces a concept of flexibility. Then there is a wage security, where definition of wage, minimum wage, and ambiguity related to definition of wage. What happens in India? There are multiple laws, and in every law, the definition of wage as to what is constituted under wage, where allowances are part of wage or not, whether these types of allowances are part or other types are parts of wage or not. So there are different laws and different definitions. To make sure there is universal definition and erase all those ambiguity, this has been brought in to make sure that there is a standard level playing field. Then there is a social concept of social protection under the code on social security. A particular unorganized welfare social security board is envisaged that should look into the welfare of informal sector on the lines of EPFO. Like EPFO works for organized sector, there would be another board which would be modeled on the EPFO, but would be looking into the welfare of unorganized sector to extend those social security features. What are those social security features? pension, accidental insurance, life insurance, certain kind of health facilities, certain kind of leave, and all those things which are extended to formal employees could also be extended to informal employees also. Then also improving the workers' safety as to when they are working in the particular their workplace, their factories, or particular the amount of breaks that can be taken, the amount of fencing on those hazardous machinery when they on which they are operating. These have been specifically mentioned, but there are certain demerits also. Like it has been said that these 4 labor codes are more inclining towards favoring the employer. India wants to project itself as labor friendly nation to attract capital, to attract businesses to set up their factories. In a way, it reduces the bargaining power of employees. And dilution of workers' protection, because there is a fixed term protection, fixed term work, fixed term contract. There is hire and fire policies which have been brought in, wherein the people can be fired without giving notices if they are the particular enterprises have less than 300 workers working. They can shut it down without giving notices to the relevant state agencies. And this is how dilution of workers' protection has been ensured, to make sure that India becomes you can say business friendly, and it reduces the collective bargaining power. Then exclusion of informal sector. On the first place, we are saying that we want to introduce the board, but we have not discussed the modalities. We only say that we prepare or we plan to, but we have not started a concrete discussion based on this. And lack on clarity and enforcement. Still, all these methodologies which have been brought in is still on paper. There is nothing which has been done as far as bringing these things in ground reality. The ground situation does not reflect the idea which has been projected or which has been envisaged in these labor codes. So what has been the progress? The status of implementation in the code on wages part, definition of national level floor wages, the giving states the flexibility to define their wages, minimum wages have been ensured. There are some governments which have brought in some of the concepts, so that has led to state level variations. There are certain political issues also. All those states which are being ruled by the party which is in the center, they have implemented some of the features, but some of the states have not notified some of the, you can say, rules under these codes. And all because labor is a more, you can say, subject which has state government's authority also, central government's authority also. So that creates certain kind of rift between center and states. Apart from that, the industry wants some of these features to be implemented as soon as possible, like fixed term contract to be promoted, hire and fire policy, to support businesses. But at the same time, there should be certain consensus which has to be built to make sure that it is all encompassing. So this is how you could have actually added your answers. And we have also asked a similar question, discussed the significance of codification of labor laws through 4 labor codes for India's workforce, and how do these codes address the concerns of gig economy in India. So this was modeled on this. The candidates who would have attempted this question would have got the ready-made material as to what is to be written in these types of questions. Coming to the 12th question, or you can say the 6th question from the GS3, the 12th number question in the question paper. What is the need for expanding regional air connectivity in India? In this context, discuss the government's UDAN scheme and its achievements. So the first thing you could have started about the regional air connectivity or aviation sector. You could have brought in the data related to the boom of aviation sector. You could have introduced based on that also. Then you could have straight away talked about the regional development. Why is it needed? Because if there is aviation, there is faster mode of transportation, that could straight away mean regional development and inclusive development. Then boost to tourism and hospitality, those far off places which could take so much amount of time if we travel by road. which would be easily accessed, and that could boost untapped areas, that could boost tourism potential of those far-flung areas and also add GDP. Improved mobility, it becomes very easy if there is flight connectivity. That is an indicator of development. Suppose an airport comes up at a place, it is also associated with relevant other developments like roads, taxi services, and there are other things, and that leads to improved mobility. Accessibility to remote and hilly areas. It is very difficult to lay railway tracks and roads in some of those far-flung areas, but it is easy to have airports and airstrips at those locations. Like in Arunachal Pradesh, we have airstrips. In some of those places where under UDAN scheme, there have been a development of newer airports in those hilly terrain, and that has boosted connectivity and has integrated those areas into the mainstream economic activities and economic development of India. And at the same time, employment generation. We know that aviation sector also creates certain backward linkages. It creates employment, direct employment, like ground facilities, like aviation sector. There are many things which are like pilot services and all the things. All these jobs are created where the facilities and jobs are created for people who are living in those areas. Taxi services and many other rest facilities, hotels, restaurants are also developed. That boosts employment creation in those areas also. The UDAN scheme, I'll just give an example. In some of the states in Bihar, there's one airport, that is Darbhanga airport. It is the highest, as far as the achievement is concerned, it is the top airport under UDAN scheme. This Darbhanga airport, and straight away because of this development, a full-fledged airport is being constructed there, and that would boost the economic opportunities in those areas, and that in a way would connect and create more cities that India needs. India needs many other cities also, and for that we need facilitation, development under UDAN scheme and other relevant opportunities. And achievements, increase in connectivity. Why? Because more than 74 airports have been added in last 10 years. New airports. Boost to passenger traffic, more than 1.4 crore passengers have used facilities under UDAN. At the same time, economic growth, it has led to regional unlocking of potential. Those areas which were not so streamlined, connected with the mainstream economy, they are also getting connected. And private sector participation. If you could connect, if you go and see the net, India has ordered more than 1,000 airplanes, and this is the world's largest orders. India has ordered more than 1,000 aircrafts, and that means because of the success of UDAN, now we are thinking that we will have more airports and will create more aviation connectivity. And the feature of UDAN scheme is viability gap funding, where a route is actually bid, and those aviation company or the airline company who get the route get the monopoly for a particular fixed period, and if they incur into certain losses, the government of India gives certain budgetary support to them. Subsidized airfare, wherein for 1 hour travel, the subsidy limit is 2,500 rupees. And similarly, development of regional airport. As I told you, Darbhanga airport, it has been one of the most successful airports, and it is being getting transformed into full-fledged airport. And likewise, there are many other airports which have been developed. So this was the whole idea about this particular question. The second last question, or the 13th question, was what are the main challenges faced by Indian irrigation system in recent times? So obviously, tailor-made talk about the irrigation facility, the irrigation potential. 55% of India's total cropped area has irrigation facilities, and you talk about the challenges like over-reliance on groundwater, roughly groundwater extraction accounts for 90% comes from irrigation, for irrigation facility only. So if 100 unit of water is getting extracted, groundwater, 90 goes for irrigation purposes. Inefficient water use because of surface irrigation, what we have found out that because of high loss due to evaporation, the water use ratio is roughly 30 to 40% only. So 100 units of water हमने surface irrigation में spread out किया for irrigation facility, only 30% is getting actually utilized, rest all is wasted. Inequitable distribution between north and south. So now northern India, we have perennial rivers, they have facilities, there's an issue of flood overflowing rivers. At the same time, south, the development of irrigation facility is somewhat difficult because of seasonal nature of water availability, unpredictable rainfall because of El Nino, other climate change. We know that the rainfall temporal as well as spatial distribution over a period of time as well as distribution over an area is getting skewed. What we are witnessing that due to climate change, the quantum of rainfall is not evenly distributed, rather it is distributed over a very short period of time, causing flooding. At the same time, the regional distribution is also very skewed, wherein some of the regions which are largely agrarian are not getting rainfall, and at the same time regions like western India, like Thar desert or Gujarat region, they have been consistently facing excessive rainfall in the past 5 to 10 years. Then we have an issue of aging infrastructure like old dams, siltation issue in channels. So all those canals, they are having silt, too much of silt accumulation taking place. So it creates an issue for efficient irrigation facility. Then we have faulty agro practices. We know that we are over dependent on groundwater, and because of certain subsidies, some of those states like Punjab and Haryana are growing water intensive crops like basmati rice, even though the topography as well as the climate does not allow for it. So we need to have these things kept, and we needed to include these things. Apart from that, what are the measures? Obviously, we needed to mention this Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana, and also brought in the concept of Har Khet Ko Pani and Atal Bhujal Yojana, groundwater recharge through community participation. Then National Mission for Sustainable Agriculture, which more looked into ensuring sustainable practices to be adopted to make sure water use efficiency is higher. And Krishi Vigyan Kendra, where drought resilient crops. Promotion of drought resilient crops, like this year's budget also, we have brought in climate conducive varieties which have been introduced, 109 varieties in this year's budget that has been advocated. So similar question was examining the potential of micro irrigation in enhancing the agricultural production in India. What are the barriers to its widespread adoption? So this was more modeled on this particular thing. So coming to the last question of this section of economy. So the last question was more related to a simple question, that is buffer stock. Buffer stock which the government of India stores through FCI and all, they have all dedicated godowns to make sure that they have certain features, like the importance is price stabilization. By maintaining buffer stock, they make sure that the prices in the market can be regulated so that the prices do not go out of control, else it will hit those at the lower end of the economic pyramid. Those poor could not afford this thing. Then that leads to food security, because it adds supply of foods, because through buffer stock only the government is ensured that they can run their schemes like Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana. Suppose what happens that they have an efficient public distribution system. But what if the crop production is hit because of certain other externalities? It is this buffer stock that ensures continuation of those free food supply programs. Then we have support for farmers, because it is interlinked with MSP. Buffer and MSP are interlinked, because to ensure buffer stocks and central pool of those crops, the MSP is announced, and that ensures income, assured income for farmers. Then at the times of crisis like COVID, we have seen that government of India needed to supply free food grains, and because of ensuring having adequate buffer stocks only, they could go for these, you can say, daring measures. And it is also a tool of inflation control, because through buffer stock, if there is excess stocking, they have one scheme that is known as open market sale scheme. Under this, when there is localized stock out situation, Government of India through FCI creates a bidding system wherein it offloads certain procured items under the buffer stock to ensure regular supply of food grains in those areas, and that is how these features are ensured by ensuring good buffer stock management policies. But there are certain challenges associated also. Obviously, we know that in any public distribution system, then issue post-production harvest or post-harvest loss. The main issue is infrastructural deficiency in storage system. We also still have open storage facility, and that creates an issue because grains are rotten. Then we have wastage and spoilage because of faulty agri-product produce handling facility, handling practices. We do not know how to handle crops, and that is how we incur huge losses. Then overstocking, it has been found out that if there is 21 million ton, the official buffer stocks for grains like wheats and rice is roughly 21 million tons, and to add to that 3 months of strategic reserves. But it has been found out that we hold more than 3 times of what is allowed under buffer stock, and that is why it leads to overstocking, and that actually distorts the market. And this is one of the core apprehension under WTO also. WTO also says that because of overstocking, that distorts market. In a way, this practice of MSP distorts market, and this leads artificial inflation. Because if government procures more, what happens that less amount of grain is available for private players, and that leads to localized increase in prices. Then cost of holding. Because of this, it is budgetary allocation. Because of high cost of holding of those grains, the economic viability gets reduced. What you are holding, the thing that you are holding is of less value than the holding cost itself. That is one of the issue with grains. And there is another thing, overemphasis on rice and wheat. We feel that the procurement under MSP regime is quite skewed towards cereal based crops, and that in a way does not supplement the food and nutritional security of population of India. So these are the features which could have enhanced the quality of answers. You could have also brought in certain reports like Shantakumar committee report. You could have also brought in Niti Aayog report on many other things. So the nutshell was attempting these things by having concrete points while writing good answers. So this was all about the paper which was asked. It was easy to moderate, attemptable, and if you could have just known about the syllabus, you could have read and prepared content on the core syllabus aspect, you could have written good answers on all of these questions. So thank you from my side. That's it.